So our last presentation, the topic is using technology-assisted project-based learning to facilitate public speaking skills in English media instruction environment. So our speakers are Ms. Wang. She is an educational developer from Jiashi Liverpool University, and Ms. Jiashi Wang. She is an associate language lecturer from Jiashi Liverpool University. So let's welcome.
So thank you very much for introducing our topic. And we are Yu Wang, the education developer in EDU from the Academy of Future Education, and also Jiashi Wang, the deputy head of Wang's Year 1 EAP module in School of Languages. Okay, so would you like to start first, Jiashi?
Okay, thank you. So good morning or good evening. So everybody, so thank you for attending our presentation. Our presentation topic today is using technology-assisted project-based learning to facilitate public speaking in an EMI environment. So I'm going to introduce the background and the methodology to our study, and my colleague Wang will share our findings with you. So our study is conducted in Jiashi Liverpool University, which is a transnational university with an English medium instruction, teaching, and learning environment. So in an EMI context, speaking has been identified as the most demanding language skill for L2 students of the 4 skills of English study. According to a student needs analysis survey conducted by the Language Center of our university, so students expressed concerns about speaking and were eager to improve their public speaking skill to better cope with their speaking coursework and tasks, such as presentation and group discussion. So in order to address such concerns, there has been some small-scale application of PBL in the classroom teaching of EAP, or English for academic purposes. So as this method is proven to enhance students' language proficiency due to abundant opportunities to practice the use of language and testing out language rules in more authentic contexts. So in other words, PBL is conducive to creating an immersive and contextualized learning experience, necessitating the need for them to learn and use the target language for authentic purposes in their simulated context, and therefore boosting their motivation. So this feature actually can be better manifested and even augmented when VR technology is integrated, since VR is well researched and documented to provide an immersive, simulation-based and a motivating learning environment for language learning. So researchers have recognized the positive influence of using either VR or PBL to support students in improving their communication skills. However, the investigations on how PBL correlates to the language development of public speaking skills and how VR-assisted PBL can be implemented in regular EMI classroom teaching have been limited to date. Actually, the latest and the most recent PBL research regarding the combination of PBL and the VR was published this year. Right? So therefore, our research aims to contribute to this field of study. Okay, so next slide. Our research questions, here are our research questions. So to what extent does a VR learning experience in a PBL context as a supplement to other forms of tuition for Chinese students in an EMI environment accelerate their acquisition of public speaking skills? And second, if the acceleration is marked, so to what should it be attributed? Okay, so next slide. Okay, so here is our methodology. So participants in our study were 4 EAP classes of students enrolled in a required module, EAP Advanced. each with 25 students of different majors, and they are all year 1 students. So majority of the participants were certified as CIFR B+ by a standard placement test, the Oxford placement test. So they were divided into 2 VR and PBL groups and 2 PBL groups, 50 students each. So as for instruments, this study was conducted with a mixed method for data collection and analysis. So first 8 in-depth interviews were conducted among 8 students, with 4 from the VR group and 4 from the non-VR group. So this is followed by mobile questionnaires distributed to all of them. So with, and we got like 75 valid responses back. Okay, so next slide. So in terms of a research design, so the experiment lasted for 8 teaching weeks. So that's about 32 hours in total. So each week, the participants had to attend 2 sessions. So with each session going on for 100 minutes. So every 2 weeks, there is a new topic, and altogether we covered 4 topics, namely inclusive education, economics, biology, and environmental engineering. So both the experimental and, okay, so next one. Right. So both the experimental and control groups were taught by the same instructor, used the same materials, and participated in identical PBL contexts. So the major difference here was the integration of VR technology. So to be clear, the experimental group learned with the VR-assisted PBL approach by viewing the PBL scenario through VR technology. In comparison, the control group learned with a conventional PBL approach without the use of VR. So they were provided with the same PBL scenario in a printed format for them. So the hardware were utilized in our study includes Google cupboards, as you could see here. So it's a really popular and low-cost head-mounted display. Students can use them to access the VR content. The software used for self-learning after class is called virtual speech, where students can add presentation slides into the virtual room to practice with and get instant feedback, as you could see from this picture, on their delivery, including on pace and eye contact. So the other useful group learning named 九商云 VR. So this is so this one was where VR scenarios were created and stored. Okay, so next slide. So our PBL assisted EAP learning style learning largely relies on role play to create an immersive context for students to practice public speaking skills. So under each specific topic, we can create several scenarios where students assume a designated role, discuss the project involved, explore resources related to their project, generate a project, and finally reflect on their project. So here you could see if we have some topics such as economics, then students are put in a scenario where they can take on roles such as economists, governors, like consumers, to discuss a controversial topic. Okay, so over to you.
Okay, so next I will talk very briefly about some like detailed work we have done for the development of our PBL lessons for both VR and non-VR, since you share the most of the lesson plan. So as you may know that there are a lot of widely discussed elements of project-based learning online. For example, this diagram actually shows the most popular interpretation of what PBL should have in curriculum design and in lesson planning. So we kind of adapt our lessons based on this, this diagram. So here we have 6 steps. So we start with a warm-up, which is quite initiated. and is not involved in any of the elements of the PBL diagrams. But this is quite important because warming up actually works as a very useful and effective scaffolding procedure for students, especially for the non-English speaker student in an EMI environment. So later on, if time allows, I will share more examples about how we actually develop our own individualized warm-up for our own students. So for the warm-up step, it takes about 15% of the entire class time. And after that, we will go into the teacher's part about the mini lecture. And this is quite equivalent to a need to know and plus a little bit on driving questions, which are two elements in the diagram. However, we noticed that after preparation, here we mean that after getting used to the PBL lessons, students actually didn't need to have about 10% of the class time for the mini lecture. So for about the last 2 weeks, student can successfully actually listen to the mini lecture about 5% of the class time. And the third step is student activities. And this is what we do most of our role plays. And for this part, we actually have the content learning, and also we can call it significant content. So with more confidence in doing your own student-centered work, students have more time, eventually about 20% of the class time to actually to do their own student-centered activities of doing more role plays. And after that, we'll have the group activity. And this is quite similar to the voice and choices by student, plus a little bit 21st century skills and in-depth inquiry and innovation. And this takes about 25% of the entire class. And after that, that will be the public presentation, and which is also the main part of the PBL lessons. And after that, students will have more time to reflect, talk to each other, and have some revisions on the knowledge part and also on the skill part. So this is a basic plan for each PBL lesson. And also this is a plan for the weekly PBL lessons. The reason I'm saying that is that here are the sample lesson design for the entire topic. Here we mean 2 weeks. So if you still remember at the beginning, my colleague Jiashi said there are 2 sessions for each week, 2 hours for each session. So mainly 4 hours per week, and each topic takes about 2 weeks. So for the first week of a new topic, for example, like the economics here, so for the lesson 1 and lesson 2, these 2 lessons actually function as individual mini PBL lessons, which means that students can actually learn and work very well with your peers without taking the previous lessons. So for example, like the lesson 1, the main goal of that will be the warm-up as a unit. And the topic for that lesson is by local and global. And for each mini PBL lessons, we do have its independent mini PBL project. For example, the lesson 1 mini PBL project will be a mini debate talking about whether students should buy local or global by having some preparation and also scaffolding. And for lesson 2, the topic is free trade versus protectionism. And the function of that lesson is about significant knowledge and driving questions. So after that lesson, students will work with your peers to think about what kind of questions they want to research and explore for further the bigger or the major PBL project in lesson 3 and lesson 4. So for lesson 3, the function of that will be the voice and choice by student plus in-depth inquiry and innovations. And students will have more time to work by group, working group and doing their own project. And the PBL project for that, for the economics topic is a role play working for NGO, free trade local to global. So we kind of made up a fake NGO, and by assigning different roles to students in each group and helping them to play the roles and to quickly think based on different perspective and roles, and to analyze the problem and thinking about the solutions of promoting a certain local product worldwide. And the last lesson, and also the last lesson of the week of that topic, will be a public presentation plus reflection. So this part is mainly for students to actually to show their projects to the entire class. And as a class, they will actually comment on each other by giving feedbacks, not only on their presentation, but also on the public speaking skills in general of using the rubric. So those are the actually the description of what we have done for our lessons. Now let's come to the findings and the discussion and findings on our project, our research. So our first research question is to see what extent does a VR learning experience in a PBL context accelerated student acquisition of public speaking skills. So in general, we find that so actually you can tell from this diagram that the VR students, the VR class think their learning experience help more in improving their public speaking skills after taking that 8-week PBL lessons. But in general, actually both groups both saw that that 8-week PBL lessons are quite helpful and supportive in improving their public speaking skills. Before I'm going to more detail about specific public speaking skills, there's one criteria I want to share with everyone here. This is a rubric, the criteria we use to evaluate students, and students also know they should use this to assess themselves on public speaking skills. So this is a marking criteria for that module, that Advanced English EAP module in year 1 this semester, for both your presentation task as well as your like group discussion task. Those 2 tasks were assessed as your final speaking assessment in their module. So basically, students were trained at the beginning of the semester, or were expected to be trained at the beginning of the semester to achieve actually excellent skills from the following 5 elements. That would be the task, fluency, vocabulary, grammar, and pronunciation. So the tutor actually show and train students about this marking criteria at the beginning, so that students were well about what kind of rubric they are using and what skills they need to improve if they want to have a higher score in the final assessment. So for the performance of their PBL lessons and whether their public speaking skill has been improved, we use the same rubric to assess. So based on both the interview and the questionnaires, it is very interesting to see that, as I mentioned, that almost all students think that their public speaking has been improved with different improvement from the 5 elements here. So you can see the task achievement and fluency actually are the most 2 improved part in the 5 skills. And another very interesting finding based on student response is that task achievement and fluency were sought as the most difficult and challenging skills in all the 5 public speaking skills. So you can see there are some increase after taking the PBL. So the orange one is after PBL and the blue one is before PBL. So you can see the increase here. And other interesting finding about student self-evaluation on public speaking skill before and after having the PBL lesson is an average comparison. So basically, I kind of compare the average numbers for each element before and after the PBL lessons. So for the before the PBL lessons, the average self-evaluation score for students for the entire 5 skills are 3.4. So you can see the task, this skill actually before the before the PBL lessons, the VR group students are quite confident on this skill. However, after taking the 8 weeks PBL lessons, there's a very obvious increase for the VR group. and also similar but a little bit lower increase for the non-VR group here. And both groups think that their fluency has been increased to some extent. And VR group think that their grammar has also been increased a little bit. So this is about the average comparison about student self-evaluation on the 5 public speaking skills. So based on those data, we can kind of draw to some general conclusion related to our first RQ research question is that both PBL and VR-assisted PBL can improve English public speaking for non-native, non-English speakers in EMI environment. However, we think that the VR-assisted PBL has a little bit more functions in helping students to improve their public speaking skills. So for the PBL group, both task achievement and fluency can be seen increased a lot after taking the 8-week training on PBL. However, for the VR-assisted PBL, we can tell from the data that more students are more confident in self-evaluation. This is quite interesting. And we will keep exploring the reasons on these findings. And the task achievement has been increased a lot after taking the training or after taking the lessons. Okay, now we'll come to another discussion on the second RQ, is that if the acceleration is marked, to what should it be attributed? So now we can say that the accelerated is marked. So I'm going to think about what actually influence or affect student acceleration. So we have some questions for students in the interviews. What are the reasons that PBL or VR-assisted PBL lessons have improved your public speaking skills? And we summarize and conclude student answers to the following points. So students think that they feel less pressured and they have more fun in learning, and they really enjoy that atmosphere. So for this part, we think that could be attributed to the anxiety level. So having PBL or VR-assisted PBL help them to decrease their anxiety level, which is quite common when people talk about public speaking, especially for non-native speaker. And another point is about immersive and real world context. So if we say like both for the first point here, both group mentioned about attribute their success or improvement to that part. I would say the second point, most of the responses come from the VR group. And this is actually quite understood because the VR group actually use the VR technique. Even though our VR technique is a little bit limited, but it can also function a little bit on the immersive environment by connecting students to the real world more, especially when it comes to the subject that is quite unfamiliar with students, for example, like environmental engineering and biology. And for this part, we think that motivation play the most of the role in actually drawing students to attention to the topic and engage them more in their learning to improve their public speaking skills, especially by practicing with your partners in group, or some students even reported to us that they did some practice after us by using the self-learning software. Okay, so the third reason is about student-centered group and self-exploring opportunities. So both of the groups think that this is quite important to help them improve their speaking. And we think that this could be attributed to 2 factors here. One is motivation, another one is a feedback and reflection. So one important thing when we design the VR group learning is that we try to provide students with both the in-class group learning and the individual out-of-class learning to see whether feedback and the reflection, especially feedback from their peers or teachers, are important. So surprisingly, most of the students think that they want to have feedback from both your peers and teachers. Nobody actually only chose to have feedback from their peers. Okay, so the fourth reason is about the critical thinking practice. Yeah, one of the reasons both groups think this is quite important in improving their public speaking skill, I guess that's because this is related or it's somehow written in the rubric by asking students to think more quickly and also by providing more in-depth thinking while they're presenting or discussing with your partners. And the last point is about whether people can have sufficient speaking practice in class. And this was well noted or discussed by the non-VR group. Because compared with the VR group, the non-VR group have more time to practice with their peers in class, while the VR group did actually practice in class, but they spend more time to get familiar with technology and sometimes had to deal with some technical problems. Yeah, and for this reason, we think the feedback and the reflection are the most important. So in the future, we are going to actually compare. These are more. So currently, all the data are more based on teachers' observation as well as student self-evaluation. So in the future, we are going to actually trace the students we have in this research on their speaking assessment scores to see whether they actually can achieve a higher score, a little bit low or a little bit lower score when they are facing with a more standardized test. Okay, so the last part, I want to share something about the challenges. I will start with this data here about students' thought on which method could improve PBL from the group learning perspective, since group learning is used for both teams. So you can tell from this diagram here, so for the VR team, they actually wanted to have more preparation of, especially to get familiar with the scenario, VR scenario, or deal with some technical issues. While for the non-VR group, they really want to have the stable group at the beginning of their first year, which means that they want to have a longer PBL learning experience rather than only 8 weeks, so that they can feel more confidence and also they can develop their own way of learning that. Okay, so there are more challenges about using PBL and also VR PBL from both the teacher and also the student perspective. Due to the time, I'm not going to read that. I just want to point out one thing is about the sufficient scaffolding. A lot of teachers actually think that, especially when we're dealing with a new pedagogy or teaching methods, scaffolding is a must, and we need to provide as many as we could. This is actually not very accurate. So we find that sometimes we need to know when and where to step back when students are getting more confidence in their own learning. Okay. All right. So I see I have 1 minute. So I'm just quickly showing one unexpected findings based from our research, and I call it highlights about the usage of the warm-up activities. As I said, this is quite, at least for our students, quite important because they were a little bit scared at first because they were not familiar with the PBL or the VR assisted PBL. So we try to think about a lot of ways to motivate them. And finally, we have our own pattern on developing some warm-up activities for our students. And we actually use idea of gamification. Okay. All right, so thank you very much. And if you have any questions or comments, you're welcome to contact us or contact the host. Thank you.
Thank you, Wang Yu. Thank you, Jiashi, for the fantastic presentation. And that's a lot of commitment because of for our Chinese colleagues, it's already midnight, 12:15 a.m. And also, I think for people still staying with us in North America, it's also lunchtime. Thank you, a big thank to everyone staying with us. And I checked, we don't have any further new questions, and all the Q&A answers will be available for our audience. And I can see we also have panelists sharing their email address and connecting with the audience. Thank you everyone for the great presentation and making your time for the attention. And hope everyone will have a nice evening and have a nice remaining day.